Well, hey guys, Shane with DaZZee IT Services here again, and we're doing another session of what we are calling DaZZee Answers, where we talk about some of the more common questions that we get as it relates to technology and advice that we are asked for. So today, we just had some storms roll through here not too long ago, had some storms coming through last night. We had some clients that were affected by that. In terms of battery backups, that's one of the more common things we get questions on. So the questions typically are going to be around how much battery backup do we need, what kind do we need, how long should we expect for those to last, and really, what do we need to budget for? Because there's not an organization or business around that doesn't need some type of business continuity when it comes to battery backups and power surges. So battery backups are going to be essential, and you want to cover those in your server room. Obviously, you need to have them in your server room, but you also want to have those on any of your critical desktops, any of your workstations, any of the items in your business that require ongoing power. So one of the things we get asked about is, how do we know how much of a battery backup we need, what type of battery backup do we need, and what does that come out to in terms of cost and budget? So we're going to talk about a few things here. And one of the things we see quite frequently is most all organizations that we talk with tend to undersize their battery backups, mainly because they start looking at price and they think, well, a battery backup is just batteries, right? It's just power to keep the machines going in the event of a power outage. But there are some differences, and when it comes to your server room, your network equipment room, you want to make sure that you do not undersize those units, because if you do, it's not going to provide the level of protection that you think it's going to provide for you. So what you also have to factor into that is, most people look at the power requirements, and they look at, sometimes it'll even be a calculator that's used from the vendor's website. They'll say, okay, we've got 3 servers and they're this type of server, and based upon the power calculations, I think this is the unit we need based upon the power draw that the servers say they have. One of the things that gets left out in that calculation is, whenever servers and network equipment typically power up, there is going to be a surge in terms of power needed to power everything up, and normally that's going to last anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes, depending on what type of equipment it is and how much power it draws on a normal basis. So the initial power up takes a lot more power, and you can hear a lot of times when servers power up, the fans spin a lot more loudly during that power up sequence. It's drawing more power when it's doing that. So you have to factor that in to your power calculations to make sure you have the right UPS or battery backup in place. Now, one thing I will point out, you will hear me talk about battery backups or UPSs and use those terms interchangeably. They are really, for the most part, the same thing. We have had some customers, when we start talking about UPS, they get confused. That's uninterruptible power supply, or UPS, or what's commonly referred to as a battery backup. So factoring in that power startup into your power calculations is critical to make sure that you have enough power. The other thing you want to look at is, how much time do you need to be able to run the servers when it's on actual battery power? The most critical piece is that you want to factor in time that it takes to actually shut the servers down. So at a minimum, you want to factor at least 15 minutes. So the other thing is, when you're selecting UPS or battery backups, you want the units that actually have at a minimum the LCD interface, so that you can go in and actually set up the software so that it can communicate with your servers and actually shut the servers down. Now, if you're running a VMware environment or a virtualized environment, there have been some issues in the past with the software being compatible with VMware, but for the most part, that's all been resolved. So you want to factor in the time that it's going to be able to take to shut the servers down cleanly, because ultimately that's the goal. So the differences that you also need to factor in is, if you've got some critical workstations that if they're working and they lose power and the machine shuts down, if you have like a CAD station, computer drawing station, you don't want to lose those designs. Or if you have an accounting workstation that's got long spreadsheets, you probably want to put some of those more critical stations on a battery backup and protect those as well. Anywhere that you have network devices, including switches, wireless access points, network attached storage, anything that is commonly used on the network, you definitely want to have a UPS or a battery backup in those. So in those closet locations that just have networking equipment, it's probably not going to take as large of a UPS for those instances as it will for your server room. So you can probably get by with a smaller unit for those locations. Definitely put what you need in terms of the biggest and best UPS in your server room. So the last thing I want to talk about is really there's two different types, generally speaking, when it comes to battery backups. And these, without getting into a lot of the detail, make a big difference, mainly when it comes to price, but also features. So one of the ones that most people select is what's called a line interactive battery backup or UPS. What that basically means is when you're operating normally, you're getting power straight from your normal power source. In the event of a power outage, it's got to actually kick over or switch over to the battery backup. Now this happens instantaneously, but not exactly. So you don't notice that switch over for the naked eye, but you can lose up to a quarter cycle in terms of the power wave. Those types of delays or loss of power cycle can actually cause corruption of data or damage to your data. So when we start putting in UPSs or battery backups for server rooms, we always try to avoid what's called that line interactive UPS. If budget is extreme concern and you just can't do it, then it's better than nothing. But just be aware with the line interactive, there is the potential, even with a battery backup, that you could lose or damage data. So the other type of UPS is what's called an online UPS. So what basically simplified this means is that instead of it drawing power from the power source on an ongoing basis, it actually runs off of batteries. So in the event that you lose power coming to the UPS, you're already on battery at that point. All you're doing is you're not going to be continually recharging the battery. So there is no switchover in that process. So if you can swing it when it comes to budget, definitely want to go with the online version as opposed to the line interactive. And finally, some of the higher end models actually have a transfer switch. So even with the online unit, you may need the ability, if you're going to be doing maintenance, you want to be able to switch in between that. So they've actually got a switch that you can, it's a physical switch that you turn back and forth between power and battery. So depending on what your situation is, you definitely want to plan those out correctly. And the last thing we'll talk about is replacement schedule, because a lot of times people will buy battery backups. And when we get called into new clients, we find this almost all the time. The UPS or battery backup was purchased 7 years ago. It's never been replaced or serviced. So the batteries themselves are no longer holding a charge. You can tell that on the ones that have an LCD. It'll show you how much charge it's carrying. And a lot of times you'll even see an error on that where it's saying that the battery is not charging properly or it's overloaded. So best practices around battery backups is that you want to replace the batteries every 3 years, and if possible, you want to replace the entire unit every 6. Now, I know that's hard to kind of stomach when it's just battery backups. You only use it when power's out, but you do not want to take a chance on losing data in the event when you're switching over to it. So every 3 years, you want to replace those batteries. Every 6 years, replace the entire unit, and definitely try to keep all of those under a warranty from the manufacturer. The reason you want to do that is if there's an event where the UPS does not perform as expected or has problems, you need to be able to contact the manufacturer and get support or coverage when it comes to that UPS. So in terms of brands, it's across the board on what you get. We've got several brands that we work with, 6 of one, half dozen the other, but really what you need to do most importantly, factor the correct size, decide between line interactive and online, and make sure that you're maintaining those on an ongoing basis. If you have any questions at all, post those in the notes below the video when we upload it. If you have any questions beyond that and you just want someone to come out and help, and you're not familiar with DaZZee, you can check us out online at DaZZee.com. That's DaZZee.com. We would love to check out your environment, help you do some power calculations, and make sure that you have the right solution in place. But otherwise, thanks for checking out the video. We'll continue providing answers to these type of questions ongoing, and thanks for checking us out.